Welcome again, everyone, to our senior art history thesis presentations. Welcome and good evening. I would like to begin with land acknowledgement. I acknowledge the Muskogee and the Cherokee, the traditional owners of the land on which the Atlanta University Center is located. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. It is a great pleasure to gather with all of you to celebrate this milestone achievement for the Art History Seniors Class of 2022. Thank you for your fellowship this evening as they commence into bright futures. To begin this evening, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Cheryl Finley, Distinguished Visiting Professor and Inaugural Director, Art History plus Curatorial Studies, Atlanta University Center Collective.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webb-Binder, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I would like to take the time to acknowledge our faculty who are here, and also to acknowledge our students who are here, their friends and their families. It really is an auspicious occasion, as Dr. Webb-Binder shared, to be celebrating the art history thesis students today, those who've majored in art history and who will be part of the class of 2022. The AUC Art Collective, and our long title is the Atlanta University Center Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective, was established in 2018 with a grant from the Alice L. Walton Foundation. And this is a really exciting program that has been in operation for almost 4 years now, where we are designed to prepare, to train, to inspire the next generation of African-American students engaged in disrupting the art industry as we know it. These are students who are going out into the world to become curators, to become art historians, to become leaders in our field, and to really change the way the field has operated for far too long. We're really inspired by their example, by their thesis presentations, and they are a representation really of the future that we all envision. Our program is directed from the Department of Art and Visual Culture at Spelman College, which is led by Myra Green, and our division chair is Dr. Ayoka Chinzira. I also wish to acknowledge our leader at Spelman College, the outgoing 10th president of Spelman College, Dr. Mary Schmidt-Campbell, an acclaimed art historian in her own right, as someone who's been a really great inspiration to this program in its establishment and in these past 4 years of operation. I also wish to share that our program operates at the Atlanta University Center, and here we also serve students at Clark Atlanta University and at Morehouse College. And you'll see just all the beautiful pictures and names of people who are here on the, I think we've got 2 pages of squares this afternoon. But these are people who are in our community. They're young scholars, young curators, artists themselves, amazing writers, and people who, as I said, are going out to really make this huge change in the art industry as we know it. I also wish to recognize Rachel Brown, who is our most amazing, most efficient, bright, and inspiring program manager, and Omalade Olubuwale, who is our program coordinator. And our program also is represented by illustrious faculty, including Dr. Ola and also Dr. Dawkins. Hello, Dr. Ola. Thank you for turning your camera on and saying hello. Professor Chad Dawkins, and also Professor Julia Neal. And I'm not sure if Professor Neal is with us here today, but we're really, really proud of our faculty and the work that they do with our students and the way in which we have the ability to host small classes and have the opportunity to have seminar-like classes that enable a different type of learning art history and engaging with one another. So I think I've said enough. The last thing I do want to share is that our program is one that, as I've shared earlier, is at the AUC We serve 3 different institutions at the AUC, but we also have an exciting feeder program to our program, and that's called the Early College Program for high school students. And this is a program that operates in the summer, every summer, from about mid-June until mid-July for rising juniors and seniors in high school to come to the AUC. And this summer we will have, for the second time, the early college program on campus, where students will have the ability to live in dorms for the period of 4 weeks and learn art history and curatorial studies, all from an African American and African diasporic perspective in collaboration with the High Museum of Art. And so it's an exciting program. If there's anyone who's joining us today who knows of a rising 11th or 12th grader who might be interested in this program, please do go to our website. That's aucartcollective.org, and feel free to look at our programs there. You could always reach out to me, to Dr. Webb-Binder, to Rachel Brown, or Omalade Olubuwale if you're interested in that program. It's one of the things that we know has gotten some of our students started at the AUC. We have students who have matriculated at our colleges or university, and some coming in this coming academic year. So without further ado, I think I'm going to pass the baton back to you, Dr. Webb-Binder. And again, I just want to give my huge and most sincere personal congratulations to each of you. I'm just so proud of all the work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Finley. Welcome again to everyone. Welcome, Professor Meyer Green, who is the chair of the Art and Visual Culture Department. We are again so proud to welcome all of you today. I want to share that it is with your support, everyone's support, that the students have reached these great heights. It's with great pride that I watch these emerging art historians and curators present this evening. We have had a year of discovery, and we celebrate that journey this evening. Just to give you a background and an overview of the thesis, it is a work of independent research undertaken by graduating seniors. This is in consultation with art, history, and curatorial studies faculty members, as well as curators and other professionals in museum field, art world. And I'd also like to send a heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the other professors at the AUC, at Spelman College, who have supported the students this year. The written thesis is an argument created by students from their own close reading, their own comprehension, their own interpretation, understanding, and critical analysis of sources. And we encourage the analysis of both primary and secondary sources. Again, this is a capstone experience for the seniors, allowing them to bring everything together that they have learned over their career here at Spelman and the AUC. It is with great pleasure this evening that I introduce our first speaker, Nkechi Star Des Ogugwa. She's a graduating senior art history major born in Arlington, Virginia. After graduating from Spelman College, Nkechi will continue her passion in art and education with Agape Youth and Family Center as their Scott Elementary Education Outreach Specialist, where she will be aiding Black and Brown students in achieving their educational goals. Her educational practice emphasizes providing safe, creative spaces for these children as an outlet, and it's the focal point of all her endeavors. She hopes to create an art education after-school program offered in Atlanta public schools. This evening, Nkechi is presenting Seeing Gold, a survey of illustrations by Faith Ringgold that reflect the influence that the Black arts movement had on African American children's picture books. Welcome, Nkechi.
Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay.
And for the presentations, everyone, I'm going to close down my screen so the speakers have the floor. And I'm asking everyone to mute themselves, please.
Oops,
And just as a reminder, sorry, this is being recorded.
Okay. Is my screen being shared correctly? Okay.
I see your screen. Can you put it in slideshow? Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Hello, my name is Nkechi Dezagugwa, as mentioned before. My project today is on Seeing Gold, a survey of illustrations by Faith Ringgold that reflect the influence that the Black arts movement had on African American children's picture books. The agenda for today, just like an overview of what I will be going through, like the highlights of my thesis. I will go over my thesis question, and then go into giving a brief history of African American children's picture books. In order to explain my thesis and dissect my thesis, I will also offer illustrations from two books by Faith Ringgold, If a Bus Could Talk, The Story of Rosa Parks, and Cassie's Word Quilt. And to further go into depth, I'm going to also include images from Tar Beach and Aunt Harriet's Underground Railroad in the Sky, and then conclusion and questions. So my thesis question was, how does Faith Ringgold's illustrations reflect the influence that the Black arts movement had on African American children's books? I want to say what inspired my thesis question was obviously my connection to art and education. When I first started my thesis question, I was trying to figure out how to incorporate what I am actually interested in, which is art education, with art history, and how the things that I've learned throughout my 4 years, how that reflects my topic. And this is this is like an image of Faith Ringgold's work as well, to further show my thesis question. Why is it? Okay. First, I'm going to start with a brief overview of African American children's picture books. And I'm going to start with this image. This image is showing the cover of the story, The Little Black Sambo. This is one of the earliest depictions of a dark, black, brown child, like in a children's story. And originally, this person's supposed to be Indian. However, this image itself had eventually turned into this image, which is the stereotypes of African American children. And these are the images that young Black kids and white kids were subjected to viewing. And this was their upbringing. This was part of their upbringing. Phyllis J. Ewell, she mentions that of the variant versions published before 1948 that were available for examination, most seem to be set in a stylized Africa or the US South. Riley Britton's children's red book series include The Story of Little Black Sambo in 1908 with pictures by John R. Neal. The illustrations were adapted from the original Bannerman's edition, but with grossly exaggerated lips, eyes, and hair. Mumbo is fat, barefoot, Aunt Jemima with a polka dot bandana. And that is seen in, like, as you can see in this image. This is another example of a children's book that was for African American children. It wasn't until around 1920 when W.E. Du Bois created the Brownies book, which was like a monthly magazine that had art, literature, world facts. It was targeted to African American children, and it was so they can provide them with content that supported them and that was for them. And I chose the picture on the right to compare it with the picture on the left, where the picture on the right, they're both of black little girls with plaits in their hair, or braids in their hair, traditional Black girl attire. But as you can see, the one on the right, which is done by a white person, you can see how they depict a Black girl. And then the one on the left, done by a Black woman illustrator, you can see how they depicted the African-American girl in a brighter light. This is a clip of Faith Ringgold explaining some of her, before I go into what her passion was and where her connection is to the Black arts movement. This is a video by Faith Ringgold.
I remember when I was young and I would go into a gallery to
Where's the
work. The gallery dealer would look at my legs, but not my art. I was born during the Great Depression, and I lived in Harlem. From the time I was a little kid, I always had my crayons, and my father brought me my first easel. I had my paint. Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima was my first story quilt. We know Aunt Jemima as this person on a pancake box. I rewrote Aunt Jemima's whole story. She becomes an entrepreneur, and she's just fabulous in my story. They would call the guys inside to sit around the table to talk to the curators and to the directors. You understand? But not me. The museum will open up to African-American artists, but you won't be one of them because you're a woman. Okay, I got it. Well, I decided that I needed to get involved with women's issues. At the Whitney Museum in 1970, they have biennials there. They had very few women in any of them. The last one that they had, I believe it was like 2%, 2 women. I said, what percentage of women do we demand? So my daughter, she said, 50% women. You want 50% of the people in the biennale to be women. You know, we'd blow our whistles. We had police whistles that we blew. We had eggs. I boiled mine and painted them black and put 50% on mine. It felt like we were doing something, and we were a part of the movement in America to equalize things.
Okay. In the clip, Faith Ringgold details her activism, and when in 1970, when Faith Ringgold, Poppy Johnson, Lucy Lippard, and Brenda Miller organized the Whitney Museum of America's annual art exhibition, they argued that 50% of the artists needed to be women, as she mentioned earlier, and need to be Black, and half of the women need to be Black. These women held sit-ins, staged artistic demonstrations, and would often leave pads, tampons, and uncooked eggs to make sure that the Whitney Museum felt the presence of women.
I remember when I was young.
Okay. The main part of my thesis research was analyzing illustrations from 4 children's books by Faith Ringgold to understand how they reflect the influence that the Black arts movement had on African-American children's picture books. As mentioned before, she emerged as a great artist during the Black arts movement, and I focused my theory on her illustrations in particular, mainly because she's one of the few living artists. She's 91 years old or turning 92 this year. And she's one of the few living artists from the Black arts movement that is still alive and practicing art today. The illustration that is currently being shown is from page 15 and 16 of Cassie's Word quilt. This book in particular stood out to me because of the contrast it had between the text Pickaninny ABCs, which was on the earlier slide of the African child learning ABCs, because of how stark the difference in depictions and of the illustrations in a book that's meant to teach children. The illustration depicts a Harlem neighborhood scene and is accompanied with 9 sight words. There are 4 apartment buildings, 1 white, brown, and black, and red, and each has a fire escape staircase on the front of the building. To the right of the building, there's a small playground over here. There's a small playground with African-American and Hispanic people playing. In front of the apartment building is a woman with her child, a horse holding a grocery fruit stand, a children playing, and just an everyday African-American neighborhood scene that was especially familiar to children of that time period. The image on this illustration by Faith Ringgold is connected to the Black arts movement in particular because it aims to educate with Black art and children, and it has children as the center, which is a direct reflection of the Black arts movement. Faith Ringgold's inclusion of a Black neighborhood is important because it exhibits a Black artist centering Blackness in their work. This not only reflects what aspects of the Black arts movement inspired her, but also exposes a different avenue of art and literature that emerged from this artistic movement. Ringgold's illustrations are riddled with elements of the Black community that are unique to many African Americans and display a familiar scene while teaching the African American youth that their environments are just as interesting. This illustration is from page 20 of If a Bus Could Talk, the story of Rosa Parks. It depicts a swimming pool. It's guarded by a Black gate with a Black pole with a sign that says swimming for whites only. On the opposite side of the pool, there are 4 Black children, and they have their swimming suits on with towels, and the white kids are the only ones that are in the water.
Oh yeah.
This reality was a common run-in for many Black children during the 60s and even into the 80s. Many Black activists would hold swim-ins to boycott segregated swimming pools. The way that Faith Ringgold used color in this illustration is one of the most important elements used. Like most of her illustrations, Ringgold made the white people depicted in the palest white, and the Black people are all the same brown. Contrast is then emphasized, which allows for the differences in the people to be obvious and communicated clearly to a younger audience. This is also, wrong slide. This illustration on page 19 is another example of Faith Ringgold portraying an important part of Black history in a way that is communicated clearly to children, where the same pattern of the pale skin, the monotone brown, and it's a way for her to clearly communicate this is like the scene that is happening, and without having to go into that much depth for children and whatnot. This illustration is from page 5 of Tar Beach. I chose to highlight this image because of its historical connections to stereotyped African-American foods and how Faith Ringgold repositioned them in a children's book targeted to the Black youth. Ringgold includes 3 main African-American dishes that are popular in the culture and community: watermelon, grape Kool-Aid, and fried chicken. These 3 popular food items are heavily eaten and loved by the African-American community. However, they have grown to encompass a negative connotation. This stems all the way from slavery, when enslaved African-Americans were ridiculed and negatively stereotyped for enjoying the fruit in the meal. In this illustration, you're able to see how Faith Ringgold challenges this negative connotation towards these African-American delicacies by showing it in an environment where it is fully appreciated, and especially when it's digested by children. What you hear and certain things are easily, what is that word? It's easily taken in. And so if they're hearing that the watermelon that they eat and the foods that they eat, whatever, anything about them that they feel is normal is quote unquote ghetto or like, whatever it is. That's what they believe. But reading a book like this and seeing a young Black girl relaxing, feeling like she's on a beach and she has the same foods that you would have, it kind of brings that into your reality and shows you that it's not a negative thing to enjoy. One of Faith Ringgold's main takeaways from the Black arts movement was to center Black women in all that she does. Slave Rape, $3, Fight to Save Your Life, is an example of her personal artwork during that time period and how the subject is of a Black woman like most of her work. Tar Beach was created at a time when Black women artists were gaining a lot of recognition. This allowed for Black women to center themselves when telling their stories. The center of this illustration is of a little Black girl with 3 plaits who symbolizes the average Black girl and a familiar face or person. It is also important to note that Ringgold showcases the Black girl experiencing joy and luxury. At this time, not many stories that centered Black people, let alone a Black girl, were awarded prestigious book awards. So who and what the main character looked like was important. This illustration, it depicts a slave auction scene where a mother and father and son are being sold and possibly separated for the rest of their lives. Faith Ringgold uses use of color, form, and contrast work together to communicate the heavy topic of slavery to African-American children. She was able to bring attention to the differences in the lifestyles between Black and white people during slavery by making the enslaved Africans' clothing darker and the white people with brighter clothing to indicate cleanliness. The entire book is focused on the harsh reality of slavery, and Faith Ringgold makes artistic choices that allows the African-American youth to digest the content. These 2 images depict the Middle Passage and showcases how enslaved African-Americans were stored on the ships. When viewing them side by side, you can see how Faith Ringgold was influenced by research on this topic and images seen. Each enslaved African in both of the images, but in particularly in Faith Ringgold's, is standing shoulder to shoulder and is visible only from the waist up. The words Captain Bondage is written on the side of the boat in white lettering. Each person on the boat has simply drawn expressions, however, their physical features are distinct. There is an overall dark hue throughout the illustration, which sets the tone of the scene. Expanding on heavy topics that reveal the reality and harsh truth of the injustices that African-American people historically had to endure is a major theme across all of Faith Ringgold's books. Faith Ringgold created books that showcase how the Black arts movement impacted the direction and content of African-American children's books. Within the Black arts movement, the advocacy of educating the Black youth was one of the many important goals. However, children's books are very rarely associated with the Black power or arts movement. The artists that illustrated books for Black children aim to provide them with images of themselves and familiar experiences, challenging the hegemonic culture of children's literature. With her knowledge of art and the Black Power movement, she used her work to tell stories that educate the Black youth through children's picture books. Through extensive research, I was able to uncover how children's picture books have been used for many years to teach the youth about their world and educate them on historical and current events, and how the Black arts movement was one of the driving forces that paved the way for African-American children's picture books. And that's it.
Thank you, Nkechi.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Thank you.
I see some congratulations, some clapping hands. If you have a question, please do unmute yourself or place it in the chat or raise your hand, please. Chat. Great job from Neil and from Ming.
Okay. Neil, you can, is that a question?
Oh, that was a great, no.
Neil has his hand
congratulations.
up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Couldn't see that.
Congratulations again, Ketchy. This is
Thank
amazing.
you.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
My question was about your earlier slide with, I believe it was the Brownies book, so Du Bois's publication for Black children.
And I was wondering if you had any more information on that, could speak on your research around that, and would know of the name of the Black woman illustrator.
Yes, I actually do know her name.
Okay.
I wrote it. I just didn't want to start what's it called, tangenting, and I don't want to add too much of the past because and focus on my thesis question. But yes, basically it was let me go to my chapter 3 first. But basically it was he created this with just give me 2 seconds. Well, he created this to offset the fact that African American children did not have outlets. They didn't have like I'm trying to think of those children magazine books that they used to give, the Scholastic like magazine books they used to give us. It's basically like that, but for Black kids, where they have Black current events, they have Black poetry and writers, and like you wouldn't have to be particularly famous. It also gave an avenue for emerging and like, I guess like start like just not as big Black artists and writers and just anybody that was a Black creative at that time to showcase their work and share it with kids, because there wasn't because Black kids didn't have that for themselves. But yeah, I'll send the name of the of her inside the illustrator inside the chat, if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And then I saw Dr. Finley's hand. Can everyone hear me?
Oh, I think
Sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just trying to lower my hand. Thank you so much. That was a really, really wonderful presentation, Nkechi, and you know how much I love this project. I wanted to ask if you could say something more about how you framed it. It's clear that the work that you've been doing in education is one of your greatest influences.
Mhm.
And I was really curious about things like, when we look at children's books, often there's a conversation about, you know, who the illustrators are, and how those children's books get acknowledged through different kinds of awards, like the Caldecott Award, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wanted to maybe ask if you, I guess it's maybe a two-part question. One is if you could say something about how you framed it, which I like the contrast between looking at stereotypical images, looking at demeaning images, and how those are something that have surrounded us for way far too long, but how artists like Ringgold and others who, you know, at the time that she's doing this work around the Black arts movement and wanting to create narratives for young Black children, she's also raising her daughter, Michelle Wallace, right? And so I just wanted to maybe hear something about the framing for you, and, you know, just to see, you know, how it created a tension to really understand how powerful and important images like this can have on how we see ourselves, how we identify, how we think about what our aspirations are, and also how we imagine futures for ourselves. So thank you very much.
Of course, you're welcome. I'm going to start with the first part, where how I framed it. Is that like basically how I came about this thesis, like in like wanting to research this?
Yes, in part, but like the way that you structured it, at least in terms of how we've seen almost like the call for the work that Ringgold did.
Mhm.
So if you look at those derogatory images, she's clearly responding to those.
them,
And
yeah.
you even showed with the image of Du Bois's work that there was a response to those kinds of images to protect children and teach children about how beautiful and smart they are.
Yes. Well, I remember at the beginning of wanting to construct it, I think I was already trying to understand how like picture books, African American children's picture books changed over time. And it was just too broad. It was too broad of a question And I wasn't sure how to add any any art historical aspects to it. I specifically chose Faith Ringgold. Like I mentioned it before, I wanted to focus on like a living artist that I could, you know, could reference. And so I could, you know, so I could see what they're doing today and whatnot. So like, you know, so there's not really a stop to their work. And so she, of course, she was the perfect candidate. I also grew up with her books. My mom used to read, and it didn't click for me until I was looking up her stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I used to have all her books growing up. My mom used to read them to us all the time. And I remember looking at these illustrations and they stuck with me throughout my childhood, especially Dinner at Aunt Connie's. I didn't include any of those images, but that was my favorite book. And I still to this day remember every single image. And it reminded me of going to my aunt's house. And so I just knew that Faith Ringgold was the perfect artist to survey like how her work in children's books, how that actually affects African-American children, and like how, yeah, like you said, like how we see ourselves and how we formulate like what we think of being Black and being a Black person. And I just really felt like her work definitely was, I don't know, I felt like her work was something that I could use to show like, okay, this is someone who you can see the artistic style, that it's similar to like a childlike figures. It's not that intricate. There's not too much in the picture for the kid to have to scrutinize. And so I just felt like Faith Ringgold was the perfect person to represent the effects that the Black arts movement had on children's picture books.
I also like, and you just made this point, I think, but you know, she's not only still a living artist, clearly, and one from that generation, but she has a practice as a children's book illustrator and as an artist outside of that, right? As an artist who does story quilts, as an artist who paints. Many of us had the opportunity to see her retrospective recently in New York. And I think having that contrast as well adds so much more to the work that you're doing that's really, really important for us and for the program. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nkechi.
Thank you.
Our second speaker this evening is Tempe Stuart. She is a senior art history major from Atlanta, Georgia, and is currently serving as a Bonner Scholar and has been involved with a number of community service organizations in the West End. She has a strong interest in library and archives preservation and a passion for research. Following graduation, Tempe has been awarded the opportunity to intern with the Alliance of HBCU Museums and Galleries at the Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library for their Practical Art Conservation Summer Program. And starting in the fall of this year, Tempe plans on pursuing a Master's of Library and Information Science with a specialization in archival studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. Please welcome Tempe, and her presentation this evening is Preserving a Legacy, Michael Cavanaugh Perry.
Thank you, Dr. Webb-Binder. Can everyone see my screen?
We can, yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello again, everyone. My name is Tempe Stuart. I'm a senior art history major from Atlanta, Georgia, and my thesis is titled Preserving a Legacy, Michael Cavanaugh Perry. And I want to give a special thanks to my content advisor, Dr. Webb-Binder. So my thesis has been grounded in remembering, which can be defined as have in or be able to bring to one's mind an awareness of someone or something that one has seen, known, or experienced in the past. Remembering is how this topic came to be. And I remember growing up, and in every house I moved to, my mother would like hang up these artworks, and she would always say, "These were your grandfathers." And it wasn't until recently that I really understood the significance of that, until about 3 years ago, upon changing my major from biochemistry to art history. Thank you, Dr. Webb-Binder and Dr. Finley again. Through remembering of my grandfather, I was introduced to a community that thrived during the Black arts movement and wanted to know more about the movement's impact in Los Angeles. During my initial search, there was limited research detailing the connections between organizations, galleries, museums, and other entities that developed during this movement and how they all connected through the close-knit community of Black artists, specifically in Los Angeles during the 1960s through the 80s. And this has inspired me to not only bring to life the depth of my grandfather's career and experiences, but to also expand on my understanding of the Black arts movement in Los Angeles and its community of Black artists, and many of them that were not originally from Los Angeles, but found community and belonging in this movement. So I have my literature review, and these texts accompanied by other primary sources such as letters, photographs, newspaper clippings, and other archival materials from the AUC Woodruff Library, the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Archive and Rare Book Library at Emory University, and UCLA's Digital Library Collections has guided my research. And I have also conducted both formal and informal interviews with my family, my mom, Michelle Perry, my grandmother, Patricia Perry, my aunt, Dara Perry, and my great uncle, Melville Perry, as well as correspondence with Alonzo Davis, Amidus Modavelli at the William Grant Still Community Arts Center, and Anita Colby at Compton College. So my literature review consists of The LA Rebellion, Creating a New Black Cinema, by John Christopher Horak, South of the Pico by Kelly Jones, Stories of a Los Angeles Griot by Ulysses Jenkins, which I also bought during our trip to LA with Dr. Finley, as we were able to visit the Hammer Museum to see Ulysses Jenkins' retrospective, A Century of African-American Art by Amalia Amaki, Walls of Heritage, Walls of Pride, by Robin Dunitz and James Pygroff, Black Artists on Art, Volume 1 and Volume 2, by Samela Lewis and Ruth Waddy, and Prints by American Negro Artists by the Culture Exchange Center of Los Angeles. For my thesis, I chose to divide my research into 4 sections. Section 1 is Michael Cavanaugh Perry, the artist, and his art, in which I provide a biographical scope, including my research through the formal and informal interviews, through my literature reviews, and just through natural conversations that I've had with my family and growing up and hearing about Michael Cavanaugh Perry and being able to talk about him in my works has been a very rewarding experience. Section 2, the Black Arts Movement in Los Angeles, California, in which I stem from Section 1, and I use Section 1 as a visual narrative into who Michael Cavanaugh Perry interacted with, who he was involved with, organizations he worked with, and through that I was able to add to my previous knowledge of the Black arts movement and also implement that in Section 2. In Section 3, In Search of My Grandfather's Legacy, examining the invisibility of Black art in South Central Los Angeles, I examine practices of collecting Black art from the Black arts movement in Los Angeles and also means of preservation. And in Section 4, my conclusion, I provide my discussion and implications. But for the sake of time, I will be providing a biographical scope and visual narrative of Michael Perry that serves as the foundation of my thesis. So Michael Cavanaugh Perry and his twin brother, Melville Cleton Perry, were born on September 8, 1940 in Los Angeles, California, at the Queen of Angels Hospital to William and Nellie Perry, Nellie Perry can be seen in the left of the photo, sitting down in the striped dress, and William Perry is in the middle in the dark blue suit. And as I have been my mom and I have been conducting informal research on my matrilineage, and in conversation with my mom about a year ago, she shared that her grandfather, William Perry, migrated during the shift in the African-American population from Texas to California. And William Perry's family, excuse me, helped found a free Black community outside of Austin and Buda, Texas, Hayes County, known as the Antioch Colony. And in September of 2021, I took a trip for the first time to visit my great uncle, Melville Perry, who I've only seen a number of times prior to this, to my thesis. And so I was able to build a relationship with him throughout this process as well. And something that I found interesting as I was going back and creating this presentation, looking at the timestamps of the image to the right, I took the image around the same day that my grandfather and Melville Perry were born. I'm sorry, I was getting a little emotional. I don't know, that just really, really spoke volumes to me. And during our trip, he invited me into one of the rooms that he had full of my grandfather's works from college, including sculptures, sketches, and works by him that I have never seen before, and other memorabilia for events from the William Grant Still Community Arts Center. And looking through these documents, I gained further insight to Michael's involvement in the art scene in South Central Los Angeles, especially with the William Grant Still Community Arts Center, which is a community arts center dedicated to fostering community through the arts. And on the left of the screen, I included an image of Michael Perry and Melville Perry. Michael is to the right, Melville is to the left. And I really love the image to the right, because that is a self-portrait that Michael painted himself as he experimented with oil and acrylic paintings, and just having his brother, his twin brother, Melville Perry, holding that image, it just, oof, it did me. And during our search, we also found like other documents, including their family tree and his birth and Michael Perry's birth information, but I just wanted to insert it because I thought it was a pretty cool primary source. And as my uncle and I were looking through the works and the documents in the room, we found Michael Perry's curriculum vitae, and my uncle recalls the document being typed by their father, William Perry, and this served as a serious guide to my research. Like, it opened so many doors into the publications I could look at, from like the exhibitions Perry was involved in, and I was able to, and also his references, including Dr. Samela Lewis and Arthur R. Berry, and from this document, I was able to create a tree or linkage of people that my grandfather interacted with, such as Van Slater and Samela Lewis, which goes into section 2 onto my specific research on those artists. These were 2 other documents and works that we found in the room. The left is just, I thought it was pretty cool, is sketches of Perry's work, possibly during it while he was in class or school, I'm not sure, but I thought it was cool to insert. And to the right is one of Perry's works that are untitled, but most of his works were intaglio on paper, which is essentially produced by marks or etches on a copper plate, followed by an ink application, and then printed through an etching press. And from the vitae I gathered in 1963, Perry obtained his bachelor's degree from California State College, now Cal State University. And in 1967, he received both his BFA and MFA at the Otis Arts Institute, which afforded him the opportunity to study with a collective of Black artists that are now well known. And in an interview with my grandmother, Patricia Perry, she recalls Michael talking to her about how Charles White will often invite him to speak during his classroom lectures. And Also, during his time at the Otis Arts Institute, he met Samela Lewis and Ruth Waddy, and he worked very closely with them, and eventually, which led to him joining the collaborative arts group Arts West Associated alongside Van Slater, who was a woodcut artist. And Arts West Associated was founded by Waddy, and the collective jury shows, sponsored community activities, and advocated for Black artists. And in this time, Perry and Slater formed a very close relationship, with Slater later becoming the godfather of my mother, Michelle Perry. Both Michael Perry and Ben Slater are featured in the 1967 publication of Prints by American Negro Artists, published by the Cultural Exchange Center of Los Angeles, California. And in the book, it includes like a short bio where they exhibited, where they studied, which was actually very essential to my research. And it also includes their works, Michael's works, Two Figures, and which is an intaglio, and Van Slater's work, Eula Seated. And I actually conduct a formal analysis on the work Eula Seated in my in relation to Eula Slater, who was Van Slater's wife, in my thesis. In 1968, Perry moved to the South to teach at Albany State College and worked alongside his colleague, Arthur Berry, who was an African-American artist who served as the chair of the art department at Albany State College. And I was able to find this connection through Perry's vitae. As I mentioned earlier, Arthur Berry was listed as a reference for
25.
As a reference for Perry. And I included an image that I found, that my uncle showed me, that I was able to take a picture of, that features Michael Perry and a friend, and also a supporter of his works who bought his works. And his works are also featured on the wall in the image. And we actually have the top one in a print that my grandmother gave me. So thanks, Grandma. In the following year, in 1969, Samela Lewis and Ruth Waddy published the book Black Artists on Art through Lewis's publishing house and gallery space, Contemporary Crafts. And this was also a Contemporary Crafts served as both a publishing house and space for artists to display their works. And Michael Cavanaugh Perry was one of those people who was able to display his works in the gallery space at Contemporary Crafts. And the book features works of Arthur Berry and Perry, as well as other notable artists such as Betty Starr, John Otterbridge, David Hammonds, David Driscoll, and among others. And Perry returned to LA with his wife, Patricia Perdue, in the early 80s and lived on 1417 West 82nd Street with their children. Both of his daughters, Dara and Michelle Perry, recall Michael painting in the 2-car garage in which he converted like one side to be his art studio. So just speaking with them provided insight to his practice as an artist, because I always wondered where he created his work and where he created his art and where he felt most comfortable in creating. And the first volume of Black Artists on Art was so well received. Waddy and Lewis published Black Artists on Art Volume 2 in 1971. And the book includes Van Slater and his work titled Sapphire, which was a woodcut as well. And through my research on Van Slater, I was introduced to a film movement that took place following the aftermath of the Watts Rebellion in 1965. And I was also given insight to the Watts Rebellion during our trip to the Getty Grad Symposium with Dr. Finley and my peers, in which a scholar discussed the exhibition 66 Signs of Neon that yielded from the rebellion through the lens of Harry Drinkwater's photography. And in regard to the LA Rebellion, Black professionals and student filmmakers at the University of California in Los Angeles were moved by the lack of representation on their campus, and also, I guess, influenced in following the aftermath of the Watts Rebellion. And in an effort to propel the works by and about Black people, the collective sought to reframe the ways in which Black people have been portrayed in American cinema, Hollywood cinema, with a focus on real accounts of the African-American experience as witnessed by people of color. And to name a few filmmakers, Ben Caldwell, Larry Clark, Alicio Taylor, Charles Burnett, and our very own Julie Dash were among the film students and professors who spearheaded this movement. And I also discussed the connection to the Ella Rebellion to other spaces that provided a platform for these filmmakers to present their work, such as Brockman Productions. They had, well, Brockman Galleries or Brockman Productions, they're nonprofit. They provided a space for specifically Larry Clark and Ben Caldwell to display their films. And I wanted to actually see some of the films produced from this movement. And I saw that the UCLA Film and Television Archive developed a DVD anthology of short films produced by the collective. So I emailed them and they sent a copy. It was a pretty easy process. And I found that the DVD featured Black Art, Black Artists, which was a short film directed by Alicio Taylor, in which he documents Van Slater actively working on a piece accompanied by a voiceover dialogue between Taylor and Slater, in which they examine the status of contemporary Black artists during that time. And through this, remembering, my understanding of the Black arts movement in LA has expanded exponentially. Some of the centers mentioned in this presentation are still alive today, such as the Museum of African American Art, founded by Samela Lewis, and the William Grant Still Center, as well as the Watts Tower Art Center. And I included pictures of where the Brockman Gallery's former location, which is now home of the Art and Practice Gallery, Art and Practice programming space, and the Watts Tower Art Center. This was a flyer I found from their summer program in 1977, but I also included a page from the William Grant Still Center first flyer in 1979 that featured Michael Perry, and as he was a drawing and paintings instructor at the center. And I apologize for it being so small, but that is him in the back. But in front of him with the pigtails is my aunt, Dara Perry. And looking through the flyer and being on the phone with my aunt, she mentioned how the William Grant Still Center, the Watts Tower Art Center, those were places of community and places of furthering their communities through the arts. And she talks about, she recalls a specific artist, Amani Corral, and at the William Grant Still Community Art Center, and how she had such a strong sense of admiration and fondness for her. And this brought another layer of meaning to my research, to this research, as it not only showed me people that I've been researching as artists, but as caring and community-driven people that have touched lives through the arts. And excuse me, I'm sorry. During my visit to LA, Amitis Modavali, the current director of the William Grant Still Community Arts Center, provided me with a tour of the center. And I think stepping into a place where my grandfather was so heavily involved, the energy was just completely like overwhelming, but in a good way. It was like, I felt like I was walking through like my grandfather's like shoes. I was able to see where he interacted, where he worked, where he taught. And during an informal interview with Modavali, she mentions how much of the history during the time of the movement from the late 70s to the early 80s at the William Grant Still Community Arts Center has been lost due to changes in leadership and lack of adequate funding for archiving these records. And this has inspired my future work in volunteership and furthering my research with the center and surrounding arts center. And to end, I heard a quote, or I read a quote, and I'm going to remember where I found it or where I heard it, but I will never forget it. It says, it is in remembering that we dream. And through this journey of remembering with my family, remembering with people that I've talked to informally, formally, books that I've read, I found my purpose and my passion in art history and archival studies, and I'm grateful. I'm inspired and I thank y'all. And here's an image of me and my uncle Melville outside of the Getty. So thank you guys. Here's my contact information. And I'm open to any questions.
Congratulations, Tempe. Really good work. Are there any questions? Let's me find. I'm not able to see hands at the moment. So are there any hands raised?
Oh, my hand, it was like a.
Oh, hi, and yes.
Maybe I missed it, but this was a wonderful presentation. I love that you focused on something within your family. That was really wonderful. And it's amazing that you have a figure like that in your family as well. It's amazing. I guess what made you want to focus your thesis on a family member in particular?
Amazing question. I feel like it's been, I wouldn't say it's been a long time coming, but this has been something that like it's constantly come up within my family dialogue, within talking with my grandmother, my mother, and I'm like, this is something that I need to write about. Not only write about, but preserve, whether in our own personal collections, but to have on paper. But I think it goes even like a little bit further than that, because like I mentioned how through his works, I learned about an entire community, an entire group of people that I may have heard or learned about briefly in class, but I guess just getting a personal narrative or personal, I don't know. Yeah, I guess you can say personal narrative on it, I guess, made it even more like, this is what I need to do.
I loved it. This was amazing. It was an amazing presentation.
Dr. Finley? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Anyway, I will always have a question. Everyone here who knows me knows I'll have at least 5 questions, but I'll limit myself to 1 right now. And I really look forward to hearing from our other faculty members and students and community members who might have questions or comments. But yeah, I mean, really, really job well done, Tempe. I'm so happy just to see and observe over time the way that you've developed this project. And I have to say, I got chills too, just thinking about how inspired you've been by your family and to be able to do this work, and also to see the different twists and turns that you've taken. I loved how you started out by giving us examples of the research that you had already found with, images of book covers, and that you come back to that, in and out of the presentation of your family members' work. And I think it's a really great testament to you as a scholar, and as someone who clearly is interested in library science. We know that, but also that teaches us through your own interest and passion and knowledge of library science, how important it is to know the sources, who's written them, when they were written, how they are in conversation with one another, and so on. And as a student of Kelly Jones, I have to say that I'm just really excited how you're kind of carrying this torch further. And I love the Otis connection in terms of his training. And I thought I would ask one question about some of the other people that he might have been in contact with, because I think it wasn't just Charles White who would have been there teaching, but David Hammons, I think, was there at the same time. And so I'm wondering, like, is there also a connection to, to a David Hammons, and is he, where is he mentioned in some of these more recent studies that have been done? So we had not just Now Dig This and South of Pico by Kelly Jones, but then also we had Sullivanation, whipped through the nation over the past, 5 years or something like that. And these are really massive studies about the Black arts movement. And so I'm just wondering if any of these research endeavors have also connected to the work that you're now uncovering. And I just have one last thing to say, and that's I like the connection between your work and Nkechi's work around the Black arts movement, and also around knowledge that's created through books. So that totally stood out as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I also thank you for that question, because I was introduced to the connection, I guess, between my grandfather and David Hammons through the William Grant's Community Art Center, because David Hammons and Charles White's work were included in the center's inaugural exhibition, which can also be found in their first flyer that was produced in 1979. And I thought I mentioned it. I don't think I meant to put that picture in my presentation, but I think that's where I kind of found that overlap in their connection through that center. But I think I am, now that you've brought it to my attention, I am interested in learning more about how they also could have interacted at Otis before the William Grant Still Center. So that's actually, thank you for that, because that makes me think more about my research.
No, you're welcome. And again, I just think that you're like looking at your work and also thinking about this larger Black arts movement, and in Nkechi's work, we've got like, you're representing the West Coast, and and she's maybe representing the East Coast. And I think that one of the things that that you're doing that's really, really important is uplifting many threads of that history that are still so just kind of fresh and tingly and exciting to be known about in this really important era related to Black art history in the US. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Dr. Phyllis.
I want to add from the comments from Dell M. Hamilton. This is great work. I was just recently doing a bit of research on the Black arts movement, so this helped to fill in some blanks. I also know folks who were students of Ulysses Jenkins, very excited to see what else you uncover. And then a question from Jordan. I wondered if you could speak more about the films you watched surrounding the LA Rebellion.
Yes, Jordan. I will say the films that were on, there was about maybe 30 short films on the DVD anthology, and the ones that I was able to that I was able to see were like, I've never seen short films like this before. So I don't know, I'm still going through a lot of them, but I can say that, I mean, if you want to come see them, I have the DVD, we can watch them, but they were I think they really spoke to a wider story, a wider narrative of Black artists during that time, but not only African-American artists, but artists of, I don't know, it really spoke to more also like more diasporic narrative, because a few of the artists included in the anthology, they're not, a lot of them were not from LA or from the the US specifically. So I think that was also interesting to see how these artists collaborated from different backgrounds in producing these films and being in each other's films as a collective. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Let's see. Great. I would now like to turn to our final speaker of the evening. And thank you again, Tempe. So very proud and just amazing primary source work that you did to create more knowledge about art history and Black artists and the Black arts movement is amazing. So thank you. Our last speaker is Ming Joy Washington. She's a member of the AUC Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective at Spelman College. She is an inaugural recipient of the Alice L. Walton Foundation Art History Scholarship and 2021 recipient of the Anita Ragland Award for Excellence in the Department of Art and Visual Culture. Ming is a curator and communication strategist from Chicago, Illinois. She is intern at Lubeznik Center for the Arts, the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and Resnikow and Associates. Ming currently works between Atlanta and Los Angeles, supporting Black artists and entrepreneurs with South LA Contemporary and the Village Micro Fund. She's a published poet and art critic for Burnaway and Scalloway magazines. Welcome, Ming.
Thank you, Dr. Webb-Binder. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you, Nkechi and Tempe, for such beautiful presentations. And welcome to my thesis presentation. It is titled Show and Tell. Are you all able to see my screen? Yes, I'm taking that as a yes.
It's good, yes.
I have a question. Is there a way to, is it large enough for everyone? To enlarge the view a little bit?
It's in the presentation mode on my end and it's full screen, so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, you can see it and you can zoom in as well if you can't see certain words. You can zoom in on your phone or on your laptop.
Thank you. I'll get started now. So this quote from Toni Morrison's foreword of Sula really shaped my thesis research. She asks, what would you be doing or thinking if there was no gaze or hand to stop you? I apply this to my research, which considers historically the work of poets, artists, and performers are inextricably linked. In Afro-diasporic traditions, all have been tasked with articulating the Black experience and often pull from similar muses. Phyllis Wheatley was the first published African-American poet in America, and her early work considered themes of Black art production, the gaze, power and agency, place and migration. My undergraduate art history thesis aims to be a close reading and analysis of Black female subjectivity by linking the work of Black women poets and performers thematically while considering their image in visual art. In this analysis, 5 poets represent the ever-evolving Black literary tradition from the 18th century to the 21st centuries, including Phyllis Wheatley, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, June Jordan, Henri Fenton Jeffers, and Maya Phillips. The poets are placed among artists that center on the themes Wheatley explored in the late 1700s and their continued discourse in contemporary language and visual and performing arts. My thesis is organized in 4 chapters, and the following questions were my starting point. What themes and approaches do the poets and artists share? How do the poem's performance qualities lead to a better understanding of the ephemeral artworks? How do putting works in conversation and re-performing verse break down site and time specificity? What personal histories do the practitioners insert into the canon? And in what ways is self-portraiture a performance act? And lastly, why are these themes central to Black feminist inquiry and prevalent across centuries? The 4 chapters of my thesis, the first being The Black Female Poet Creates Herself in America. The second is Poetry and Performance from Slavery to Freedom. The third, How Free Can Black Women Be? Subverting Agency and the Gaze. And the fourth is titled The Black Woman Character, Performing for the Camera, Performing in the World. These 4 chapters will reveal the answers to my thesis questions. My literature, methods, and theories are deeply in debt and informed by the scholars listed on the left and some of the texts that I have illustrated with these cover images. This thesis is a multidisciplinary pursuit combining my training as a poet with that of an art historian. I explicate 12 poems. I conduct a reflective analysis on each author's verse and analyze the poem's elements and possible meanings to draw connections between the poem's narrative and the author's literary choices. I also complete formal art historical analysis of artworks, and as a performer, commit some poems to memory and reperform them on public and private stages. This combination of disciplines leads to my central theoretical approach, which was theorized by African-American scholar Saidiya Hartman in her essay, Venus in Two Acts. She coins the term critical fabulation by questioning how does one rewrite the chronicle of death foretold and anticipated as a collective biography of dead subjects, as a counter history of the human, as the practice of freedom. She describes this method as critical fabulation, and I defined it for my mom as using the archive and detailed historical record to play, pretend, and imagine the missing moments. Through this method of deconstruction, Hartman and myself and my many subjects attempt to jeopardize the status of the event and displace the received or authored account to imagine what might have happened or might have been said or might have been done. When taken up by Black women artists and intellectuals, this approach becomes a recombative narrative which weaves past, present, and future while narrating histories as our present revealing of paths for future liberation. With this understanding, I use critical fabulation to frame the trial of Phyllis Wheatley, to consider how poet Henri Jeffers takes up this theory in her 2020 National Book Award text, The Age of Phyllis, and how a few of the other artists and performers engage this theory. Other theories and methods I engage, critical fabulation is expanded by Tavia Nyong'o in this book, in Afrofabulations, and Nyong'o attempts to queer and racialize Hartman's concept of critical fabulation to expand it to Afrofabulation, which is a strategy for Black queer bodies to vocalize and perform against anti-Black racism in order to transform powers that seek silence and erase Black bodies. My other theoretical frameworks include W.E.B. Du Bois' understanding of double consciousness, Patricia Colin Hill's conceptualization of Black women's position being both and Kimberly Crenshaw's expansion of this belief into intersectionality. I also engage the poet Elizabeth Alexander's theories of Black interiority and kind of juxtapose this concept of metaphysical space beyond the Black public everyday into the Black imagination and private life with some trappings under patriarchy, like Frances Harper being stuck under the cult of true womanhood. And then the last theories that I engage are that of institutional critique, especially through many subjects' relationship to Harvard and prevailing public institutions of power. And lastly, Adrian Piper's theories of indexical present and meta art. My framework considers all of these many subjects through 4 considerations, and the first of that being personal. I probe autoethnography, autobiography, biography, self-imaging, artist and author photos, as well as public versus private space. I next consider political qualities, that of race and class, Blackness, gender and sexuality, nation, state, and institutional critique. I consider performative qualities of all of these works, including performing for the camera, ephemeral art, the sonic experience of some live performances, but also of spoken word poetry. And lastly, poetic qualities of these artists and writers. Consider truth-telling, the merge of art and language, and the ekphrastic poetry form, which is a form of art. It is a form of poetry written and inspired by art. And my introduction to this form, it was so fittingly kind of articulated by Nkechi, in that I first wrote a ekphrastic poem to Faith Ringgold's story quilts, and that form has been taken up by many artists and poets, and the exchange between the written language and the visual art is really palpable in this experience. This is kind of serves as a figure list. I consider 12 poems in my thesis, 7 performances, and about 12 artworks. And this is just the credits of each of those. My first chapter is titled "The Black Female Poet Creates Herself in America." And this title comes from a June Jordan poem. But in this poem titled "The Difficult," it's titled "The Difficult Miracle of Black Poetry in America," or something like a sonnet for Phyllis Wheatley. It was written in 1985, and it is June Jordan's response to Phyllis's legacy. Phyllis Wheatley was a poet born in West Africa in 1753. In the late 1770s, she arrived in Boston and was purchased by a white family there. At 14, she authored this poem, which went on to be her most famous, "To America." And I will just read the 8 lines here. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there is a God, that there is a savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolical dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined to join the angelic train." So in my first chapter, I really deconstruct this poem line by line and consider Wheatley's word choice, particularly around the word mercy, and how the poet could deem the oppression and subjugation she experienced as merciful, or even her white captors as merciful. I engaged this through Henri Jeffers' poems "An Issue with Mercy" #2, as well as Wheatley's biblical allusions towards the curse of Cain, which the subject of my 4th chapter, Carrie Mae Weems, equates to invisibility or Black invisibility in the face of whiteness. This chapter details images of Phyllis Wheatley. Starting on the left is a Scipio Moorhead engraving of Wheatley, which was published as the frontispiece of her collection of poetry in 1777. And this image is the most used and referenced of Wheatley, and has been interpreted by generations of artists. Continuing from the left to the right of the screen, I consider Phyllis's reception in France, and how she's portrayed as a Parisian poet here in this second image. Elizabeth Catlett's sculpture of Wheatley from 1973, which was created at the occasion and by request of poet Margaret Walker, who in 1973 organized the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival at Jackson State, where you see June Jordan, Alice Walker, Lucille Clifton, all performing and singing together in honor of Phyllis Wheatley. And below that image is an image of me and the Phyllis Wheatley sculpture by Meredith Bergman at the Boston Women's Memorial, which I recently visited on a trip with the AUC Art Collective. My second chapter considers poetry and performance from slavery to freedom and opens with Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's poem, The Slave Mother, where she details an auction site. An auction scene. I also analyzed the poem, The Slave Auction, in this chapter. And this quote is the first stanza of Harper's poem, and it opens, "Heard you that shriek?" On the left, I have a video of Felicia Rashad reading this poem, and in expanding this research, I would like to consider more theatrical performers and possibly expand to one-woman stage plays and performances intended for the stage. The subjects of my second chapter, Beyond Frances Harper, are on the left, the photographer Nona Faustine and a series titled White Shoes, and on the right, a performer, Robin Lewis, who also goes by Dragonfly, and in 2016 performed as George Washington's absconded slave, Ona Judge. This was actually in 2020 on the election day between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Dragonfly processed through New York streets as this absconded slave, and did a Zoom performance or Zoom streamed performance. And so through this work, I kind of consider the mechanics of performance documentation, of ephemeral artwork, of assuming a character, and through Nona Faustine's work, consider self-portraiture. Some of the early questions I had regarding Nona Faustine included if her engagement with enslaved histories was a reproduction of violence, and I consider how to approach these histories with care, and that is really influenced by June Jordan's philosophies regarding poetry being a medium to process and engage our painful histories. The reference photos I have around Nona Faustine is some of her inspirations, including the daguerreotype of Delia at the top left, and the figure of Sarah Bartman in the bottom and center. In this chapter, I also consider author photos through Frances Harper's image, starting on the left, an image from 1860 when she was 35, and to the right, an image from 1910s in her 80s, and really the chance for a long life and legacy of free generations and free writers, in comparison to Phyllis Wheatley, who died while attempting to publish her second book, and really struggled with getting support towards publication. So a sub-theme of this thesis is analyzing the publication history and practices of Black women intellectuals. A proponent of this, and kind of related to Nkechi's engagement with children's books is June Jordan, who in 1969 published her first book, Who Look at Me, which is intended as a children's book. And she opens this aphrastic poem. It's a marathon poem that covers about 30 pages typed and is intersected with 27 reproductions of Black art. And Jordan opens this poem by asking, who would paint a people Black or white? Is that how you look? Is that how we look to you? A partial nothing, clearly real. To the right are the figures that Jordan engages and writes from in this book. And some of the artists included are Alice Neal, Charles Austin is really heavily included, Henry Tanner. So it was really intriguing to consider how publishing in a children's book was and it doesn't necessarily read as a children's book in terms of the language. And so the fact that Jordan had to publish in this genre kind of speaks to the difficulties of Black women poets getting support towards publication. My third chapter is titled How Free Can the Black Woman Be? Subverting Agency and the Gaze, and really focuses on two central performance practitioners. On the left, Adrian Piper, and on the right, Howardina Pindell. The image on the right is from Pindell's iconic video work, Free, White, and 21, where she combs her personal archive and personal memory retelling experiences of racism to kind of recalibrate herself after experiencing a car accident. And I, now being 21, relate to this work, but also relate to this work after facing similar experiences of car accidents and being personally worried about my memory. To the left, Adrian Piper's Mythic Being series is a performance series that begun in the 80s, and the image in the center is a newspaper advertisement which introduced this series to the public, and is Piper's, an example of Piper's use of personal poetry and journal mantras in which she introduces this character that is totally opposite all of her qualities of identity. I go on to, I'm actually going to go back. I go on to consider three of Adrian Piper's self-portraits. On the left, self-portrait exaggerating my Negroid features. In the middle, self-portrait as a nice white lady. And on the right, a self-portrait from 2012 where the artist denounces her racial identity and her national identity and would like to be referred to as the artist formerly known as Black. And so I use Adrian Piper as an example juxtaposed to Frances Harper, who is also a fair-skinned Black woman. And both of these subjects lean into or away from their racial identity or their gender identities to gain attention or even pacify white audiences. And so I break down Piper's conceptual understanding of racial identity and self-governing agency. The central poem of this chapter is June Jordan's poem About My Rights, where early in the poem, she says she has been the wrong everything, the wrong sex, wrong age, wrong skin, wrong nose, wrong hair, the wrong need, the wrong dream, the wrong geographic, the wrong sartorial. I have been the meaning of rape. I have been the problem everyone seeks to eliminate by forced penetration. And the poem ends, I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own. And I can't tell you who the hell set things up like this, but I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination may very well cost you your life. And in that powerful statement alone, I think she articulates a lot of the play between how you were perceived versus how you self-identify that the artists in this chapter engage as well. My last chapter is titled The Black Woman Character Performing for the Camera, Performing in the World, and it details Carrie Mae Weems' oeuvre through 3 works, starting with the series in the middle, the Kitchen Table series, and a poet, Maya Phillips, a phrastic response to all 3 of these works, the museum series shown on the left and the roaming series shown on the right, both from 2006 and the Kitchen Table series from 1990. Maya Phillips is a poet and cultural writer for the New York Times. She primarily writes about theater, and in this chapter, I not only detail the performative qualities of Carrie Mae Weems' work, and particularly her avatar building, how she uses herself and her own body as a vessel for Black women archetypes, as a guide through history, or as one scholar refers to her as history's ghost. Maya Phillips takes on this avatar on the page and writes in a first person, writes through a first person speaker, a voice that I try to allow the same distance that Carrie Mae Weems takes on in separating herself from her art, in allowing Maya Phillips that distance as well, the first person, not immediately reading the first person as autobiographical, instead considering the nuances of her speaker. And the selection from the left is from the poem, it's a response to Carrie Mae Weems, excuse me. Oh, not that it's all the way back at the beginning. The poem on the left is a response to the museum series, and she says, I forget the statue of my body, the artifact I am, Black and woman, my survival is studied, a lesson I relearn every day of my life. Art's mercy divorces the artist from her image. Her body's exhibition, I'm saying not I, but the subject is the woman, is not I, is the topic of discussion. That is to say, I'm only me when I am found in the mouth of another. On the right, this stanza is Phillips' response to Weems' roaming series, and she says, have you ever thought how the sight of a woman wandering faceless in a long dress always looks like a haunting? But here, in the black and white landscapes that bow around me, I stand something haunting and extraordinary, an interruption in a Black dress. Thank you. I am working to provide a reading list and some poetry prompts inspired by my thesis. So if you'd like to contact me or follow me on Instagram for that information, it is coming soon. Thank you so much for your time and for listening to my thesis presentation.
Thank you very much, Ming. Are there any questions for Ming? I see heart, I see clappy hands, more clappy hands, more hearts.
I'll start.
Okay.
I just have to say that, you know, Ming, how much I love this project. And it's just really exciting to see how it's all come together. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, So this question is about, when we write theses, they're typically written works in our field with images and references to archives and research, et cetera, but presented in a form that, well, now is typically delivered digitally as a document. Back in the day, they were also bound, and I know that there are opportunities to do that as well. But, as your work bridges poetry, works of art or artistic practice in the sort of visual form and performance, and as you yourself are a practicing performance poet, and as it is part of your practice as a poet to not only write the works that you do, often inspired by or in response to works of art themselves, but it's the written delivery of your performance that really makes the work. And so I think my question to you is about the sort of the format in which you gift this work to us. Is it going to be the format that we typically expect, or might there be another way to think about that, how this thesis is going to live? And I'm asking this from the standpoint of, when we talk about what we do here at the AUC Art Collective, it's all about innovation and change, disruption. And that's what each and every one of you has done today. And as instructors in the program, we're required to, and it's our great pleasure and delight to always bring technology and innovation into the classroom and into the assignments that you are asked to do in the learning process. And so I just thought it would be a way to think about the work that you've done, and whether there might be other ways. You had video to share with us, but if there are other ways that you might think about the final product.
Thank you for your question, Dr. Finley.
You're welcome.
It was definitely a challenge to consider how to format this work, especially with the poems, because some of them are very, very long, and I didn't know if it was best to reproduce the poems in their entirety in text in my thesis, or at earlier presentations, I've read full poems, and that took a lot of time. I think that a model, and that is the same for performance in terms of the various strategies for documenting performance. Like Dragonfly did a Zoom recording, and it was 4 live stream cameras of different angles and different points of view on her performance. But if that document is considered the performance itself, or the medium has a lot of flexibility towards the archive. But I think for this thesis presentation, a model that I would really love to present it in is based on a lecture performance model, which is kind of performance art in the classroom. I think I could have done a more effective job, like getting this presentation to be a lecture performance style thing, but that is my goal, like how to present this work almost as a stage performance, or almost as a poetry showcase in itself. Yeah, so something to think about. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. So I'm just going to say one other thing. We're again just so happy that everyone is here today. Again, thanking Dr. Webb-Binder for her guidance and inspiration, working with each of you throughout the academic year as the thesis advisor. I think her example and your example is just one of the crowning crowning gems of what can be done and what one can do, and how a faculty member can be so invested in her students, and vice versa. I also just wanted to acknowledge too that, you know, there's another performance artist here in the room, Del Hamilton, whom I know you know, Ming. And you know, really happy that you're here, Del. Thank you so much for your comments earlier, but also that they're alumni, excuse me, of our program, and or, you know, our close friends that we see often in our program, including, I see Kyrie Blackman is here, and I think Christian Reader was, or maybe you're still here. You are, Christian. Yeah. So
Joaquin.
okay. And Joaquin, yeah, Joaquin was the first one that I saw. So yeah, so
These were wonderful, wonderful presentations, Cheryl. So thank you so much.
no, thank you for being here. Yeah, everyone. And Dr. Webb-Binder, can I ask this one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
And it's not a question for Ming, but it's actually a question for our audience, our invited guests, students, and especially our faculty. If there are any questions that any of you might have for our thesis presenters today, it would be great to hear from you. And I'm sure they would really appreciate any questions you might have for them.
I have a question, Ming, and it's a half-formed question at this point. I was thinking about the last poem that you read, and the idea of, I think I'm paraphrasing it, I am the artifact. And I'm thinking about, when I think about Dr. Finley's question about the format of your work and how you're presenting it, and also in reference to the idea of an artifact as knowledge, and then thinking about the work that you have achieved here, I think I'm just trying to put together that your work, your approach, and your method, I think, is moving towards becoming a different type of artifact for the field. And I know that's been important to you throughout the process. I just want to say congratulations on that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webb-Binder.
And there's a question, Dr. Webb-Binder, from Christian Reader in the chat. Would you like for me to read it?
Could you please? There's one from Chris, and then I think there's another one. Yes, that's it. I think there's probably two questions from Chris. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just see the one at the bottom. So the one at the bottom for you, Ming, it says, Chris says, as a poet, curator, and scholar, how do each of these practices inform and communicate with the other sectors of your work?
Thank you for your question, Chris. I would say that each of those hats I wear are inseparable. A lot of my initial thought and inquiry engaging an artwork is very early a poetic response. And for a lot of my curatorial projects, writing a poem is where I start. It will be interesting to compare this work against literary scholars in their approach to dissecting or analyzing poetic work. I hope that answers your question. I can't even separate those those roles because because that's my point of view. It's all of that at once.
And then there was a comment by Chris who says, so interesting, Ming, exclamation point ×2. The second chapter seems like it coincides with the movement for artist books, parens, question mark, 1960s, where artists who had trouble with publishing took dissemination into their own hands through leaving publishing houses to create collectives in artist books.
Thank you for that connection, Chris. I hadn't brought that line of thought to the 60s at all, but it will be interesting to, I mean, the publication struggles continue, like present day. So it will be really interesting to consider how that developed over time. And it is humbling to think that Phyllis Wheatley is experienced the same struggles as Maya Phillips or Henri Jeffers towards getting their work published.
Are there any other questions or comments from colleagues, alumni? I see several first-year students. I can see you projecting ahead to your own presentation in 3 short years. Before we end this evening, and we can continue with questions, but I just want to make sure that I don't not make this announcement. The Art and Visual Cultural Department has departmental honors, and one of the criteria for the honors is that a student receives and maintains a 3.5 or above in the major. And I'd like to announce this evening that Ming Washington is the recipient of the AVC departmental honors.
Thank you.
Also like to announce that Ming Washington is a new member of Phi Beta Kappa.
What's that? Thank you. What's Phi Beta Kappa?
Phi Beta Kappa is the oldest academic honor society in the country, dating back to 1776. And it celebrates excellence in the liberal arts and sciences. And it also champions the freedom of thought. And so it's a national honor society and the most prestigious in the entire country.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you should be receiving an email. All right, everyone. Are there any other questions for Ming or Nkechi or Tempe?
Thank you. I wanted to ask Nkechi if she'd consider expanding this research to contemporary Black children's books.
Actually, yeah, as I was doing my research, I actually found a lot of I guess books that were written now in like this time period. I know the most recent Caldecott winner, the most recent Black one, because there's only been, what was it, 4 Black winners and 3 honor winners, then they're women. And within those 4, it was like a couple. So there's very few Black ones. And so, what's it called? What am I trying to say? But yeah, pretty much, yeah, that answers your question, yeah.
Thank you.
Was there someone else?
We're just so proud of you all. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
This has been, I was just gonna just say that it's been an amazing experience working with all of you and seeing you blossom as scholars. And I appreciate you sharing that journey with me. So thank you very much. We've reached the end of our evening. It has been an amazing evening of fellowship and joy and knowledge created by art historians and curators and scholars of the future. And I want to thank you all again for joining us and to just to wish everyone a good, safe, and happy evening until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to stop recording?
Yeah. I will.
Are you able to do that? Do you have control?